Hi everyone, and welcome to the fourth day of the 12th International Forum on Illegal, Unreported and Unregulated Fishing. Fantastic to see that so many are joining. I'm Anna Åberg and I work in the Energy, Environment and Resources program of Chatham House. Today, the discussions will focus on IUU fishing in Southeast Asia, and we have an excellent set of speakers lined up. And I'm also very pleased to say that the session today will begin with a keynote speech by Ian Urbina. Ian is an investigative reporter, and he has also become a bit of a rock star on the ocean stage recently by publishing an absolutely fascinating book called The Outlaw Ocean, Journeys Across the Last Untamed Frontier, which I'm sure we'll hear more about in his keynote speech. Before we kick off, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to those who joined the session yesterday on fishery subsidies. As you know, SDG 14.6 calls on governments to prohibit certain forms of fishery subsidies that contribute to overfishing and overcapacity, and eliminate subsidies that contribute to IUU fishing by 2020. So the focus of the session was particularly timely. And the session had a strong focus on the negotiations going on within the WTO. And I think it was clear from the presentations that a lot of progress has been made in these negotiations over the past year. However, it was also clear that COVID-19 is having a significant impact on the process. As I'm sure many of you know, the ministerial conference that was scheduled to be held in Kazakhstan in June this year has been postponed. Despite this, I think the message overall was one of hope. And Ambassador Wills, who's chairing the WTO group in which these negotiations are being conducted, said that it is still possible that an agreement can be reached this year. So thanks again for attending, and thanks for all the excellent questions. We're really delighted that there's such a strong engagement from you all.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you to all of our participants who have joined us for this regional deep dive today. It's midday here, but wherever you are, thank you very much for joining us. So as you've discussed over the last few days, IUU fishing remains a pervasive problem. Today, what we'll be doing is taking a deep dive looking at the situation in Southeast Asia, which accounts for approximately a quarter of global fish production and whose fishery sector supports tens of millions of jobs. Now, in recent years, the threat of IUU fishing has received increased attention among policymakers in the region, and many governments are now starting to take concrete action to address the issue. So our panel is going to discuss some of the opportunities, but still some of the remaining challenges of eliminating illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing in Southeast Asia. Now, with us to discuss these issues is Sophie Benbow, who's head of marine at Fauna and Flora International, Warawit Wanchana, policy and program coordinator with the Southeast Asian Fisheries Development Center, and Gina Green, senior associate with Tetra Tech. So I'm going to hand over now to our speakers, who will do very short presentations, and then we're going to open it out to questions from you all. Please do use the Q&A function that you will see at the bottom of your screens to send through any questions that you have, and I will try and get through as many as possible. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Sophie, who's going to share with us some of the lessons that they've learned from the work that she's been doing on Cambodia.
Great, many thanks, Champa. I'm just going to try and share screens. Great, so thank you very much, and thanks to Chatham House for persevering to hold this event in these somewhat testing times, and for the invitation to join this panel. As Champa said, for those that have managed to join some of the sessions earlier in the week, I'm sure we're all aware of the scale of the issue that IUU presents globally, but I wanted to highlight the severity of the problem in Southeast Asia in particular as the focus of this session. So I was just going to give a little bit of context about IUU in Asia in particular. So the 10 ASEAN countries account for around 1/5 of global marine fish production, and as Champa said, the sector supports over 100 million jobs, including 10 million fishers. IUU obviously has significant economic, social and environmental impacts, and financial losses in the Southeast Asian region are estimated at between 3 and 20 billion per year, depending on which report you read. When we discuss IUU, the tendency is to assume we're talking about large-scale industrial fleets. But I think the key challenge of Southeast Asia is that the majority of fishing vessels are actually smaller and engaged in more artisanal fishing. So VMS and other technologies are less prevalent, as they're often not compulsory on these smaller boats, and their cost can be a huge barrier in implementation for these fishers. So FFI is working in Myanmar, Indonesia and Cambodia to support community established areas for marine protection, supporting locally led patrols and working to embed these more bottom-up approaches into marine conservation, marine conservation international law. So I'm going to focus on a case study from our project in Cambodia, which would have benefited from some maps and images that I was hoping to show you, but I shall try and work around that technical glitch. So Cambodia is a country undergoing dramatic change and is emerging as an exciting and rapidly developing country with one of the fastest growing economies globally. And fish is the major source of protein, supplying over 3/4 of all animal protein in the country. In general, Cambodia has been much slower to develop its marine capture fisheries than other Southeast Asian countries and has a smaller industrial fleet. But it is still estimated that up to 25% of catch by Cambodian vessels is landed elsewhere, so there still is significant leakage. There's immense pressure on the marine system along a relatively small coastline, with open access fisheries legislation giving all Cambodian citizens the right to fish, and meaning that the government is looking to promote co-management approaches to help limit fishing effort. So in response to this, FFI has helped to establish the country's first marine protected area around the Koh Rong archipelago, which is kind of off the centre of the Cambodian coastline. It was designated as an MFMA in 2016 by the Ministry of Fisheries and then redesignated as a national park in 2018 under the Ministry of Environment. So within this marine protected area, FFI has been working with community fisheries to establish community-led patrols. These patrols use smart software, the spatial monitoring and reporting tool. So this is free open source software to track infractions and to record spatial logs of track data. These are civilian patrol teams embedded within traditional local governance structures, and they conduct patrols fairly independently, collecting data, and where possible, they are accompanied by a fisheries law enforcement officer. Recently, we undertook some analysis of these patrol records and compared it to 2 other data sets. The first one was data from social surveys, so with findings from 184 interviews with community members, tourism business owners and fishers. We asked them about their knowledge, attitudes and perceptions to the MPA and to illegal fishing, and we did some participatory mapping to assess the perceived locations of where the patrols are happening and where the illegal fishing is happening. The third stage was to triangulate this information with satellite data. So with our partners Ocean Mind, they conducted a vessel analysis of the entire EEZ and looked in particular at what was going on within the MPA boundaries. This was a multi-sensor analysis using AIS, infrared, radar and optical imagery, which recorded medium to large scale vessels only. The optical data was particularly interesting, and I had some nice images to show you, but you can actually identify fishing type and gear from those images. So you can identify trawling and purse seining from those satellite images. So what did these data show us? So from the smart patrols, we find clear hotspots on the eastern side of the MPA, where patrol effort is focused mainly around the population census on the islands. And the social data from community interviews and mapping exercises show very similar patterns and a clear awareness by the communities of those patrol locations. So this clearly indicates a need to improve patrol coverage to cover a wider area of the island, and also to randomize some patrol timings and locations to reduce their predictability. So now we know where the patrols are happening, where is the illegal activity happening. So again, from the smart data, we show hotspots for illegal fishing on the eastern side of the MPA. And over time, we have recorded a reduction in the incidence of illegal fishing, which is very positive. However, this is biased to where those patrols are taking place. From the social data, we see 2 hotspots of illegal activity, one on the east coast where the patrols are located, but another one on the west coast. However, these are very much focused around the village locations. The third figure, the map that I wanted to show you, shows the satellite data, which is really important, and it shows significant levels of illegal entry into the MPA boundaries on the west coast of the island, where fewer people live and where we know that fewer patrols are taking place. So the key recommendation from all this relates to a retargeting of patrols to the west side of the island. However, this comes with fuel costs and safety implications, as sea conditions are often worse on that side of the island, and the patrol boats currently used are small local vessels suggesting that this might be the limits of the scope of community-led patrolling and clearly highlighting an area where higher level enforcement is needed. So I hope this has been a positive example of a community-centred approach in a data-poor situation. We find that the smart patrols provide significant data which can be adapted for reporting in a relatively cheap, simple and replicable way. And positively, the Cambodian government is now about to roll out smart nationally, and FFI will be supporting them with that. By embedding the patrols within the community, we also help to cultivate community pride and awareness of those fisheries rules and regulations and lead to greater compliance among those local fishers. The social data helps us to identify the drivers of illegal fishing locally, and the satellite data reveal high-risk areas and allow bigger picture reporting to feed into higher level management and governance. So into the future, we will continue to actively support collaborative MPA management and governance, and to maintain the cycles of data collection, which we are planning. So that's the social data is every 2 years, and we plan the satellite data analysis every 3 years. Crucially, we'll also consider IUU risk planning in the development and implementation of future MPAs, which is planned in the next 5 years under current funding. We believe that this, at a broad scale, this evidence-based and site-focused interaction has garnered significant support from both partners and government, generating an opportunity for increased and improved action into the future. And we will be working to inform national IUU and MCS policy by supporting the government in the development of a national plan of action for IUU and some other important documents. So that's all I was planning to say. Thank you for bearing with me with the technical issues, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to show you the maps, which would have really helped everybody to better understand what I was trying to say. But I just wanted to say a quick thank you to the government of Cambodia for their support and ongoing partnership, and feel free to reach out to me after the event. I'm sure my contact details will be somewhere, as they're not on the slides.
Thank you, Sophie. And hopefully what we might be able to do is share the presentation, all of the presentations with our audience after the event. I think you've illustrated the importance of, national level policy and what can be done within that space to tackle this issue. But moving now to Warrawit, who works more at the regional level, are you able to share with us some of the experiences that you've had and lessons you've learned from trying to foster regional cooperation in combating IUU fishing?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Okay, I'm really lucky I can see my PowerPoint on the screen now. So good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thanks to the organizer to invite SafeDeck joining this webinar. I'm Warrawit, working at SafeDeck Secretariat. The topic is on the regional cooperation to combat IUU fishing. Next, please. Let me tell you what Southeast Asian Fisheries Development Center is. SafeDeck is an intergovernment body established in 1967 as a regional organization to promote fisheries development in Southeast Asia. We have totally 5 technical departments with one of Secretariat Office stationed in Bangkok, Thailand. The technical expertise of our SafeDeck training department covers all aspects of capture fisheries for both marine and inland. Also cover the aquaculture, fisheries management, and fisheries post-harvest. Over the years, SafeDeck has implemented a number of research activities, capacity development activities to support ASEAN member states. Next, please. Yes, this is the background of what SafeDeck working with the ASEAN. In Southeast Asia, SafeDeck is the intergovernmental organization with no mandate for the regional fisheries management. However, SafeDeck could work with ASEAN through the ASEAN SafeDeck Fisheries Consultative Group Mechanism framework. And in the support of various activities for the benefits of the member countries, ASEAN SafeDeck Strategic Partnership, or ASSP, was formalized in the year 2007. Envisaging to enhance closer cooperation between SafeDeck and ASEAN, also including its member countries, to achieve long-term common goals towards collective regional development and management of sustainable fisheries in the region. Currently, for your information, there are about 20 projects implementing under this program. in this year, 2020. Below on this slide show you the mechanism on how CFDEC developed the policy document and submission for the endorsement by higher level of the ASEAN mechanism. Next, please. Over the years, we found that the effective fisheries management in Southeast Asia could be made through the dialogues discussing on the issues of the transboundary species within Southeast Asian region that could be made based on the geographical features that you saw on this slide, based on the sub-regional areas, including Gulf of Thailand, Andaman Sea, South China Sea, Sulawesi Sea, Lower Mekong Basin sub-regional areas. The common elements that could be worked out for sub-regional fisheries management, including the need to combat IUU fishing, that are taken into consideration for the support, the sustainability of fisheries in Southeast Asian region. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yes, I took some of the regional initiatives developed recently and endorsed by ASEAN CFDEC collaborative framework that I mentioned earlier. The first group is on regional fisheries and aquaculture, covering all aspects of the fisheries. That includes the regionalization of the FAO Code of Conduct on Responsible Fisheries. And recently, we have developed the Resolution Plan of Action on Sustainable Fisheries for Food Security for ASEAN towards 2030. And the second group consisting a number of documents, including ASEAN Catch Documentation Scheme, regional fishing vessel record, I will elaborate later on. And those are ASEAN guidelines to prevent the entry of fish and fishery products into the supply chain in the region. And there are also a number of documents published by CFDEC in collaboration with ASEAN member states. Next, please. Let me tell you fisheries and aquaculture sector's contribution from ASEAN region. We have, from fishery sector, have improved livelihoods of the people, especially in terms of the employment generation. We can say that more than 10 million fishers and fish farmers are involved in these sectors that also generate employment, especially rural and coastal communities. In terms of export of fisheries products, based on ASEAN statistics, it could be found that the region's largest exporting countries, according to fisheries statistics in 2013, was Vietnam, accounting for 37% of the total export fishery products. Indonesia follow, contributing of 26%, and Thailand 19%. This implies that region foreign exchange earnings generated starting the year 2013 could be between 11 to 16 billion US dollar. Next, please. Now come to the issues on IUU fishing for the region. There are a lot of challenges that confront the fisheries and aquaculture in the region. Those include the impact from the international fish trade related requirements. And for those issues in the region include the one that I'm showing on the screen, including illegal fishing activities within the countries, landing of catch across the boundaries, including double flagging of the fishing vessel, poaching in other countries' EEZ, illegal fishing and trading practices of live food fish, ornamentals, and other endangered aquatic species. Also, the IUU fishing activities in IC and IFMO areas, where they are landing in ASEAN member states. Next, please. This slide shows background on the process of one event. We are developing ASEAN joint declaration towards the joint ASEAN CFDEC declaration on regional cooperation to combat IUU fishing and enhancing the competitiveness of the ASEAN fish and fishery products. Next, please. SafeDec and member countries met over the years on the efforts to implement several initiatives in addressing against combating IUU fishing. There are a number of issues and aspects I shown on this slide. I will elaborate a little bit later. Next, please. The first one is on the ASEAN catch documentation scheme, with the aim to improve the traceability for capture fisheries toward development of the common regional catch documentation system. This ASEAN catch documentation scheme concept was submitted to ASEAN Sectoral Working Group on Fisheries, and it was endorsed in the year 2017. There are three main objectives of this catch documentation in the ASEAN. First, providing unified framework that ASEAN member states can use for enhancing traceability of fish and fishery products for effective management in their own respective countries. Also enhancing the credibility of fish and fishery products for intra-regional and international trade. Lastly, preventing entry of fish and fishery products from IUU fishing activities into the supply chain. Next, please. The ACDS is designed to meet the requirements of ASEAN member states. The system supports the electronic types, not creating unnecessary burden. And we are based on the best practices in many countries and many areas, including CAMLA CDS for toothfish, SWAM Sweden, FAO guidelines on CDS, the governments of Indonesia based on EU system, Department of Fisheries Thailand based on EU system, and Fish Marketing Organization of Thailand. Next, please. The process for developing the electronic catch documentation in the country, starting from introducing the EACDS concept and system, and we are with the participating country, we finalizing the planning of these developments with the countries, including the collection of key data elements with the countries. Recently, we have 4 countries participating in our program on EACDS, including Brunei, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Myanmar. Next, please. Yes, the next initiative in the region is on regional fishing vessel record. Since 2015, a database system was developed by SafeDec in close collaboration with our ASEAN member states to serve as the regional inventory of fishing vessels, where the ASEAN member states provide information to SafeDec for input such information into the system. This program was endorsed by SafeDec Council and ASEAN Sectoral Working Group on Fisheries and Special SOM in that year, 2015. SafeDec has provided a series of regional building, capacity building to ASEAN member states for utilizing this database. Next, please. This slide shows the data, key data elements contained in the regional fishing vessel record. The data provided to the ASEAN member state using the web-based application. We provide username, password to ASEAN member states, and the information in the system updating twice a year. And we have regular meeting every year in order to update this information. And we have a number of target users in the country of participating countries. Next, please. Yes, the outputs from this program is that include the comprehensive information of fishing vessels, starting from sharing information within ASEAN member countries. And I'm pleased to inform you that we are now exploring the database, another new set of information from ASEAN member states on the vessel size ranging from 18 to 24. The current one that we have is the fishing vessel size over 24 meters in length. Also, in the near future, we may have the new program now in the process of exploring development of the IUU fishing vessel watch list. Yes, thank you. Next, please. This is another regional initiative. Over the years, we have finalized the documents with ASEAN member states, and we can have adopted ASEAN guidelines for preventing the entry of fish and fishery products from IUU fishing activities into the supply chain in the year 2015. There are a number of strategies and measures recommended in these guidelines, which are based on the identifying forms of IUU fishing vessel and IUU matter in the region. During the year 2018 until now, CFDEC has carried out monitoring and evaluation on the status of implementation of this guideline in ASEAN member states. Next, please. This is my last slide. There are a number of key player organizations on these issues combating IUU fishing in the region. CFDEC assisted ASEAN member states to develop a number of policy documents and guidelines. And also we are working with FAO, NOAA, providing capacity development program for ASEAN member states on port state measures. And also activities regarding combating IUU also include the developments of the ASEAN catch documentation in electronic form, and also database of fishing vessel that we are cooperating with ASEAN member state in collaboration with the FAO, the global record on fishing vessel as well. That's in my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Warowitz. Thank you for the comprehensive overview of some of the challenges at the regional level, but also some of the existing initiatives that are seeking to tackle these issues. Moving now to Gina, I mean, it would be interesting to hear about the role of countries outside the region who also want to see greater safeguards within Southeast Asia, whether that's in terms of wanting to know where their fish is coming from or wanting to ensure the practices are done in a sustainable and transparent manner. So are you able to share with us some of the work that Tetra Tech has been doing with countries in the region?
Absolutely. First, let me wait for the, great, thank you. Thank you, Anna. First of all, I'd like to thank the Chatham House for sponsoring this important forum. And so far, I've learned a lot from the other panelists and speakers throughout the week. So congratulations to all of you. I know it's been a lot of work, especially in these times. And I'm very pleased to be part of this important presentation. My name is Gina Green. I'm a senior scientist, senior associate with Tetra Tech. And my primary role is to develop, implement, and manage marine, coastal, and sustainable fisheries projects. Next slide. Great, thank you. As we've heard, Southeast Asia contains productive and very biodiverse marine ecosystems and provides food and income for over 200 million people in the region, significant. The region's fish stocks and coral reefs are in danger because of IUU fishing practices, which threatens biodiversity, food security, and livelihoods. And productive fisheries are facing collapse, and very specifically in certain countries. The decline of regional fisheries has devastating consequences for regional food security and seriously degrades the highest marine biodiversity area on the planet. And I'm going to repeat that. Southeast Asia has the highest marine biodiversity area on the planet. Next slide, please. This is a graph of the sea of threats, and really can be applied anywhere. And IUU fishing has a tremendous impact on fisheries. If we didn't know that before, we certainly do after this week's great presentations. And in addition, Southeast Asia fisheries have faced challenges related to gender equity and unethical and illegal labor practices. And these are critical factors of IUU fishing. I'm not going to go through the graph, but we know that at the end of the day, it really impacts on the sustainability and biodiversity of these functioning ecosystems. Next slide. I'd like to say that the US government has invested significantly in Southeast Asia marine biodiversity and sustainable fisheries for over 30 years. Now, Tetra Tech has managed 5 recent USAID funded projects focused directly and indirectly on addressing IUU fishing in Southeast Asia region. The projects have invested in building capacity, they've developed tools, and systems designed to improve integrated and sustainable fisheries management in the region. A focus is on priority species that are vital for food security, economic growth, and biodiversity conservation, and that are under threat from IUU fishing and seafood fraud. And each project that has been implemented has a measurable impact in reducing IUU fishing within specific ASEAN member countries. Next slide. By the way of this, it's a simple example from a very complex project, and this was the EcoFish project, which was financed by USAID in the Philippines. Among the fundamental problems and it was very complex, and one of the aspects of the project was we worked on a new technology. And what the project found is that one of the fundamental problems of combating IUU fishing is knowing who is fishing. EcoFish worked with the government of the Philippines to create an online fisherfolk registration tool and database called FISHER. And FISHER was created to overcome one of the main barriers to registering fisherfolk in a nation of islands such as the Philippines. Very difficult. And before FISHER, fisherfolk traveled long distances over difficult terrain to register at a municipal registration center, costing time and money. And before FISHER was rolled out, an estimated of only 5% of the fisherfolk were registered. With FISHER bringing the registration process to any network-connected device, registration increased dramatically. And by 2017, FISHER had over 1.7 million registered fishers in the database. Next slide. The development of new technology tools, as mentioned by Warwick and Sophie, enables other ways of combating IUU fishing. Another example comes from the Sustainable Ecosystem Advanced Sea Project, financed by USAID in Indonesia. Well, we know that the sea is big and policing fishing is a very formidable challenge. Working with fisherfolk in Indonesia, the project developed a communication network that connects fisherfolk together with local law enforcement. The fisherfolk are the eyes on the ocean, reporting illegal fishing practices to law enforcement and enabling efficient use of law enforcement resources. The communication networks help keep the fisherfolk safe and protect their livelihoods. And bottom line is people who are watched are more honest. Next slide. One last example is from the Regional Oceans and Fisheries Project financed by USAID called Oceans. And this project developed electronic catch documentation traceability, ECDT technologies with real-time tracking and communication systems, and piloted them, went deep in 2 sites with outreach and education to other ASEAN and Coral Triangle member countries. Fishing vessels report catch, species, weights, weather conditions, expected time back at port, problems with their vessels, and it's all real time. The real time information from fishing vessels drives efficiencies throughout the supply chain, from the boat to processor, exporter, wholesaler, and market, reducing cost and increasing value. The fisherfolk that participate get increased safety at sea. They receive economic benefits of having the ability to sell their catch, sold as it's caught, and some market uplift. It is also true that fisherfolk that participate in ECDT are more transparent in all their fishing practices and are less likely to use trafficked labor. Next slide. And rewarding the good guys, tracing voluntary compliance, reducing the illegal seafood being imported into high-value markets, is all enabled by ECDT technologies. Well, technology tools will continue to be developed, and over the series of 10 10, 15 years. We know that these tools are making fishing more efficient and are helping to protect against IUU fishing. However, these tools are not solutions on their own and must be adapted to local constituencies and conditions. The application of technology will be very different in combating IUU fishing in an offshore commercial fleet when compared to a small-scale inshore fishing community. However, we are very encouraged by new and exciting digital technology partnerships between the fishing industry, fishery managers, and law enforcement agency to share real-time information that can be used to verify legal and safe fishery supply chains. Through our current and future work, we are supporting the development of this partnership model to combat IUU fishing. We've experienced encouraging initial results to date in our projects, but there is a lot more work to be done in this space. Next slide. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about sort of the next steps and what's coming next in combating IUU fishing in Southeast Asia. I'm not going to read through this slide, but basically this list shows the things that we and our partners are focused on, and that's sustainable fisheries production, building market incentives, expand the use of technologies, engage and empower communities, develop machine learning capabilities, and address gender gaps. Southeast Asian fisheries are tremendously important, and so many positive lessons have been learned in combating IUU fishing. So we must work harder and work together. Next slide. And I'd like to thank you, the Chatham House, and I'd like to thank our partners and the governments. It's very much a collective effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. I'm going to start bringing in the questions that we've received, and thank you to those who have sent them in so far, and please do continue to send in the questions. So one of the first questions we've had is that if you look at responses to IUU fishing across Southeast Asia, it's extremely fragmented. Even at a national level, there can sometimes be jurisdictional overlap between various stakeholders, despite coordination attempts. So what is your views on what could be done to increase cohesion and reduce overlap? Are you aware of any efforts that are seeking to do this? How much is SA, FDC, for example, being brought into these discussions? So Warwick, if I turn to you first, perhaps you could share how you're seeking to ensure coherence given this fragmentation that exists.
Yeah, I'm not so clear what your question is.
So the question is that the approaches that have been taken are quite fragmented across the region. But what do you think can be done to increase cohesion and collaboration across the region and reduce this overlap?
Yes, for your information, right now, SafeDec trying to do the sub-regional fisheries management approach. As one of my slides, I was showing on the Andaman Sea sub-region, Gulf of Thailand sub-region, Sulawesi Sea sub-region. Those countries surrounding in that sub-region or areas can come in the platform where they can discuss most likely the same problem or the issues that they're facing with. So SafeDec providing a platform where the concerned country, for example, Myanmar is not concerned Sulawesi Sea anyway, so we try to get them up in the sub-region areas and discuss the issues based on the existing problems, and this way we can improve our better management in the region.
Thank you. And Gina, obviously through your work, you work a lot with partners in the region. How do you, as an organization that's based outside of the region, navigate this sort of fragmented landscape? And what are you finding that's useful in terms of ensuring coherence?
From our experience, I think it's very important to really understand there's as you probably realize, very cultural sensitivities and differences, and it's to really go deep, kind of what Sophie was talking about at the individual site, and then see what lessons can be learned and applied at a more sort of provincial level than a national level, and then in a regional level. And I do believe that CFDUC is a really important partner, and what they present are platforms. But in order for the technology to work, one really does need to understand those cultural idiosyncrasies and how things actually operate on the ground.
Thank you. Sophie, I just want to ask you a slightly different question that we've had come in, but feel free to comment on this question as well. What do you think, are there any lessons to be learned about how to cover the cost of organising and continuing patrolling against IUU fishing? Do fishermen have to depend on the government to patrol, as it's difficult to organise self-patrolling? You know, what are the sort of measures that could be put in place that would avoid corruption, or are there alternatives that we should be considering?
Yeah, quite a lengthy and nuanced question. I think, at least in Cambodia, FFI is supporting the patrols, but we're not paying any salaries. So the patrolling is being led by a group of passionate local people. We're working within the community fisheries system, which is an existing local level governance group. So we're working within a structure that already exists. Although it's worth noting that those groups do not have a mandate to fine or to detain anybody caught in an illegal activity, unless they have a representative from the Fisheries Administration on the boat with them. So there is a limitation to how much these kind of community-led patrols can go. The other limitation in that is that they can only really police the nearshore areas. So they're in very small to medium-sized boats, which are very common in Cambodia. But for large-scale IUU fishing on the high seas, there's no way that the community groups can hope to police that. And that might be where the satellite technology comes in, or other different forms of technology. And I think that has to be a slightly more government-led approach.
Just on that note as well, I mean, to open this out wider, perhaps if we turn to Warrawit first, what do you see as some of the challenges of policing IUU fishing in the South China Sea, and then how to best manage relationships with China in that respect?
Yes, thank you. I'm not so clear what area they are mentioned about, but if the area is based on the high sea, not the EEZ of the country, I think we need a kind of joint patrol. I don't know, whoever can bring them in, this is the way. But in the EEZ or EEC of the country, I think we have no idea. It depends on the capability of the country to do so.
Yeah, did you want to come in, Sophie or Jean, on that question? Because I guess there's a number of related questions around this. You know, some of our audience are saying China has made vast claims over aspects of the South China Sea through the so-called 9-dash line, which, you know, they then issue licenses to their fishing vessels. But do you see this as a form of IUU fishing, and what is the role of the international community or countries within the region in order to address those issues? Sophie?
I can jump in quickly. So that area is not currently within any of FFI's geography, so it's not a focus for us. But I think it pulls back to the discussions on day one of the forum about the importance of international collaboration and cooperation, and having that in place in whatever form it can be is absolutely crucial to achieving sustainable and equitable fisheries. And I think there needs to be a lot more communication and discussion regionally and bigger picture more globally if anything is going to end up being sustainable.
Thank you. Gina?
Yeah, I would like to reinforce what Sophie was saying. I think, you know, these international agreements are critically important. And I'd also like to reinforce the science behind what we're trying to achieve, and that's the integrity and health of this fishing stocks. And I think that's really key, is to get a real significant handle on the whole sort of ecosystems, and to understand and to really sort of pull that and bring that back to what that management of that RFMA is, and then who is responsible for the management, and then support that type of law enforcement. But that needs to be coupled with the science also.
And just, Gina, to stay with you for a moment, one of the questions we've had is, you talked about some of the data that you've collected through the technology projects you've done. Is that shared with local and regional governments or relevant international organizations? Is that made transparent to the public? How is the information that you gathered shared then with different stakeholders?
Yeah, we've worked very specifically in the two pilot areas in Indonesia as well as in the Philippines, and we work with the Ministry of Aquatic and Fisheries for MMAF with Indonesia, as well as with the Bureau of Aquatic and Fisheries within the Philippines, and both those government entities have a database that information that we do collect goes into that database. And the information, when you work with the private sector, that there is a part of it that is not shared. The information's more the commercial side, but as far as boat registration, where they go, if it's sustainably caught, so that then information actually is shared. And then that's transferred over to and it's related to the government, goes to the government.
And a supplementary question, which technologies in particular have you found useful or successful for doing ECDT work?
I think, one technology that really comes to mind, and what I did experience, is a very local technology that was developed for small-scale fisheries, and it's called the FAME technology. And it's been developed over a period of time where the individual small-scale fishermen fishing in southern Philippines and Mindanao is able to take to have a traceability unit on the boat, and is able to tag the fish, to record the fish, and it's all done with a tablet, and then it comes back to port. So that fish is from bait to plate. But the really awesome aspect of this type of technology, it's real-time live information. And so if that individual fisherman has any issues, safety at sea, that they're able to text back to the baseland, to the base, and to communicate with their families. So it's a safety at sea aspect also. So there have to be built incentives into the technology of why people and individuals really want to use the technology. There has to, in the market incentive also has to come in.
Sophie, just to draw on your experiences, I mean, which technologies have you found particularly useful working at the national level, for example, with your work on Cambodia?
Yeah, so I think in particular, the work that we've been doing with Ocean Mind has been really helpful in just allowing us to step back and see the bigger picture of things that through the communities we're really not able to track and monitor. But I think there's quite a sensitive issue around making sure that any new data on that scale that we're finding out is shared sensitively and seen as constructive when you're sharing that with governments. The other tool that I think on a smaller scale is very useful is SMART. So in terms of a very simple, free, low cost, hopefully easy to use system that communities can learn and pick up quite quickly by using a smartphone. It's a really helpful technology in enabling us to see very quickly the spatial distribution of illegal activity and also patrol effort.
Thank you. Ronwit, I just want to bring you in because one of the questions we have notes that if you look at sort of the regional instruments or agreements that exist in Southeast Asia or across the ASEAN region, they're voluntary or non-legally binding. How effective do you think a voluntary approach can be? And in your view, is there a need for stronger measures that are more legally enforceable?
Can I come in?
Yes.
Yes, I think all of us observed that over the years we have quite strong enough intervention from EU, for example, red card, yellow card. You can observe that number of ASEAN member states, some of the countries are getting cards from the EU. So that is strong enough in the region, I believe, that a number of countries in the region now try to improve their own fisheries management, including such a traceability system and those kind of capacity of the countries that they can make.
Thank you. A question for all of you now that we've had come in, which is, I guess, very timely and relevant, is what do you think the impacts will be of COVID-19 on the incidences of IUUF? Is it going to impact surveillance or enforcement in the region? So perhaps if we turn to Sophie first, do you see the pandemic having an impact on this issue? And if so, in which ways?
Yeah, thanks. It's obviously a really relevant question at the moment. There is anecdotal evidence of more fishing within the MPAs, but I think this is probably slightly more smaller scale fishing than the kind of large scale industrial fleets. I think a key issue is patrolling effort. So in some places, certainly the government representatives that have been joining the patrols are not able to travel. So while the patrols may still be going out, they don't have that same power to do anything because they don't have that representation from the government, and that's true in Cambodia and also in Myanmar where we work. There's also a lot less motivation by the community groups to undertake patrols because they're all suffering financially. There's been a lot of impacts on fisheries markets. A lot of export chains have been severely disrupted. So a lot of the communities that we work with are suffering pretty basic financial impacts as a result of the pandemic. And I think it's natural that there'll be some increase in IUU. But I think certainly in the sites that we work in, some of the disruption to the supply chain has actually been a slight controller on the scale of the IUU that we're seeing.
And do you see this as a short-term disruptive impact, or do you see some potentially longer-term changes that are being sort of baked into the system now that will change, whether it's the challenges faced by IUU or measures to try and mitigate it?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I don't think we know the answer to that yet. It's very much an evolving situation that we just need to watch and see what happens. I think as FFI, we're doing our best to support the communities and governments as necessary to navigate their way through this challenging situation. I know in other areas of the world, we are seeing an increase in more local markets for fisheries produce. So the export markets internationally have stopped or dramatically decreased. So there's a big drive to generate more local markets for available seafood, which I think is an interesting fluctuation and something that would be very positive if that can be maintained once the pandemic is easing off.
Thank you. Gina, turning to you, what do you see as the impacts of COVID-19? And are there perhaps, unintended consequences that could be potentially beneficial in the long term?
I can't predict the future, so I don't know about the unintended consequences. But what I can say is the development of these electronic catch and documentation traceability tools can be very positive to prevent, to really secure a safe food supply, chain food supply. So the market is assured that the hygiene and the sanitation rules and regulations are applied. So the end users that are purchasing, the market that's purchasing the fish know that it's coming from a safe source. And that whole chain, that whole supply chain of that fish does go through the processing and to the export and to the retailer. And there has to be some sort of certification at the end of the day, because I think people will be asking that question, is it coming from a safe source? So I'm really pretty excited about expanding the ECDT tools to actually include that aspect. And that would be another sort of key data element in order to trace the sustainable and safe supply of fish.
Well, Robert, if we could bring you in now, what, if any, from the work that you're doing at the regional level, what sort of impacts are you seeing from COVID-19 and the work that you're trying to do?
Yes, thank you. Regarding the impact of COVID-19, I think that the period is too short and we don't have a specific survey on this. But as far as I talked to the Department of Fisheries Thailand, The difficulties in terms of surveillance and monitoring, yes, took place at the beginning of the COVID, but right now the condition is getting as normal. The condition of patrolling, the situation of monitoring the activities at sea are the same before COVID-19, in case of Thailand, for example. And as you may know, a lot of numbers in small-scale fisheries, many of them operate only 1 or 2 persons on the vessel. They are not impact anything in terms of fishing activities, but the problem is on the marketing or selling of the products when they after catching, because limited number of markets, the buyers and those are coming always to get the products and to the restaurants are reducing, and the price of the fish now at the market is lower compared to before COVID.
Thank you. Sophie, turning to you now, one of the questions that we've had is how are women being engaged to address IUU fishing in Southeast Asia? What sort of roles do they play? What more could be done? Is this an area that you've been looking at within your work on Cambodia?
Yeah, I think it is an area. It's an area that we are trying to address, but it is slow. Kind of traditionally, women aren't that involved in fishing. We do have women now on the community fisheries patrol, so they are going out on the boats and taking a stronger role in that kind of thing. We did some dedicated gender-based activities within the participatory mapping, so trying to pull out the female-specific views about those kind of aspects. Looking at the wider supply chain, they have a heavier role in fish processing and sales, so that's an area that we'll be continuing to work with them more closely on. And when we're doing a lot of our community participation and consultation work, we make sure that we hold gender-specific meetings. So we find that when you have a mixed group, the women won't speak that much, but in order to pull out and fully understand their views and opinions, we make sure that we have dedicated female sessions, I think that's a lot more useful in pulling out what is an important opinion.
Gina, and how have you been able to engage with women in the work that you've been doing to address IUU fishing?
Well, we've done very intensive gender analysis, and sort of similar to what Sophie was saying, is to really understand what the specific issues are. And we know that, you know, in Southeast Asia, 50% of the fishery supply chain is in the employment area is women. So we know that women play an incredibly important role, and then therefore should have a voice in the whole fishery sector. And then the question is, how do you empower those women at those different various nodes? So we've come up with very specific tailored gender interventions you know, we've done a sort of training guides, more than happy to share the information in the publications that we have developed. We've developed sort of training models on financial management, actually how you manage your own businesses. We've introduced the EC technologies. We've worked with the informal, I think on Tuesday it was mentioned that there's these networks of women and gender-based fishing sectors, and we've really sort of worked with them, as Sophie was saying, is to work specifically with those women groups and to sort of empower them through legal tools, give, you know, sort of identify mainstream. It's really mainstreaming gender throughout the fisheries sector is really important.
Bonwit, I just want to bring you in for a question that we've had from one of our speakers who says, you know, only Thailand has ratified into ILO's C118 in order to protect the fishermen and women more. Why do you think other Southeast Asian countries seem reluctant to follow this step? And what do you think is the biggest reason behind this? Oh, have we lost Warrawit?
No, you answered. You asking me?
Yes.
I have no idea, because we are not working too much with the ILO labor. Yeah. Sorry.
So then turning to the questions are flying in, so I'm trying to keep on top of them. How do you see, Sophie, in the work that you've done, have you seen any, it's phrased as legitimate resistance or protest by small-scale fishers or communities against the need to follow the new IUU fishing restrictions, and how have you managed those tensions?
Yeah, I think a lot of what FFI's approach is about fundamentally is involving the communities. And I think if you engage in consultation from the get-go so that the communities are aware of the need for those rules around fishing, then you meet a lot less resistance. I think often the case you find one or two kind of key vocal people within a community or within an area that are particularly against any rules or regulations. But I guess over the long term, once you have enough people on board and they start to see the positive impacts of those fisheries regulations, then hopefully everybody gradually buys into that. So FFI does a huge amount of consultation in all of our work, and in particular in designing MPAs which come with fisheries restrictions. And inshore MPAs in particular are focusing more on those small scale fishing activities. And I think that's a really key point for us.
Thank you. Gina, just on the same point, have you in your work come across resistance or protest to following these regulations and new restrictions? And how have you worked with organizations to get past that?
I really, to do anything in any culture takes time. And I agree actually with what Sophie is saying. You have to work with the local idiosyncrasies. You have to talk the talk and walk the talk. And I believe that understanding what those issues are with the law enforcement, if there is enforcement at sea, if there's corruption, not corruption, you have to know those specific details. And then at the same time, you're educating about what are we trying to do at the state. We're trying to keep these fishery stocks healthy. We're providing sustainability. And that's really key. So you need to know where your spawning aggregations are. You need to protect those spawning aggregations. You need to have rules and regulations around that. You need to have critical MPAs. It's complicated. It's just not one IUU fishing regulation. It's a whole complex. And something we've been doing is called the ecosystem approach to fisheries management, which kind of lays out the whole functioning system that needs to take place. And with governance, with legislation, education, training, markets, fishing effort, all that has to come into one overall plan. And then you bring in the specifics and the enforcement, because what are you trying to enforce? You're enforcing to preventing overfishing. And why are we doing that? To provide the sustainability of the ecosystem. And why do we need to understand the system and the functioning of the system?
Thank you. And one final question, because I think we're almost out of time, and apologies to those whose questions I wasn't able to get to before we hand over back to Anna for the speech. One of the questions that we've had in asks, how can the private sector themselves be brought in to ensure compliance with the guidelines and regulations against IUU fishing? And maybe, Sophie, at the national level, has there been work that you've done to look at the role of the private sector?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's critical. I think it's probably something that we need to devote a little bit more time to. At the moment, FFI is developing our internal fishery strategy in order to engage more effectively on these kinds of issues. I think it's really interesting, because when you've got small scale fishers engaged in illegal fishing, the impacts of that are going to be vastly different from a large scale trawler coming through, completely destroying an area of seagrass and the biodiversity impacts that go alongside that. So there needs to be a level of engagement with those seafood producers and fishing organisations that are willing to have those discussions. And I think it's really important as we move forwards to engage them more effectively and to make sure that we can create those dialogues.
And while we're at the regional level, are you working with the private sector? And if so, how are you working with them to ensure compliance with the new guidelines and restrictions?
Yes, thank you. Regarding the electronic catch documentation in some of the participating countries of the program, so far we in the process of developing such traceability system with the countries, we have involvement from the private sector in their own respective countries. But in terms of more bilateral or trilateral cooperation is not yet to that stage, because the system, the traceability system in each country is so complicated. And when we want to link it up with the other countries, it's a lot of work to do.
Gina, turning to you for that question. How are you working to bring the private sector to ensure compliance?
I think, you know, at the end of the day, and my own experience being in the field and talking to processors and the seafood providers, always the question came up is, I would ask, what's your concern? Their concern is the sustainable supply of the production. So if the private sector wants that sustainable supply, and they need to have that understanding that they too have to limit themselves. They too have to comply. And I think Warwick's right, it's very complicated, but you need to bring on that private sector because they are key. And at the same time, there has to be incentives to utilize this traceability and sustainable systems. I think it's efficient. It's no longer paper database, paper, and it's easier to get through customs, and sort of that whole chain becomes much more efficient and better. And at the end of the day, what we need is to ensure that there is this sort of sustainable, well-managed fisheries resource, but the private sector is really key. And I do believe that they're very keen to support these efforts, because at the end of the day, if there's no fish, they have no business.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time. As I was saying, thank you to everyone for all of your questions, and apologies to those that I wasn't able to get to. But I'm going to hand over to Anna now, who can take us through the keynote speech.
Thanks, Champa, and thanks to the excellent speakers, and to all of you who attended this webinar or watched the event via the Chatham House website.